Good morning, YouTube. It is, I don't know, January 25th, 2022. Cold. We live here in North Carolina. It's not supposed to be cold in North Carolina, but it was 18 degrees this morning. And we've had snow twice in 1 week. I need all my northern friends to come down here and get your drunk weather out of my yard. We live down here for a reason, not to have snow everywhere. But anyhow, since it's cold and I can't do anything outside, I am going to come in here to the garage and freeze a little bit because it's still cold inside. But today what I'm going to do is fix one of the more annoying problems on this car and put in a new lower door hinge on the driver's side. It squeaks a little bit. It's not necessarily the squeak that is bugging me at the moment. It is the fact that the door will not stay open. The little keeper that keeps the door in position is broken, and therefore you're constantly sticking your leg out and holding the door open with your knee. It is just something that I want to fix. All right, there we go. Notice as soon as you let go of the door, it just wants to close on itself. So we're going to fix that. The problem with these door hinges, which are trying to get into the frame correctly, is that the two bolts that are on the back side, that are all the way up at the front here, that go into the body of the car, you can't get to. There's just no way that I can see that you're going to be able to grab or back those two bolts out completely and still, well, you're just not going to have access to it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the front fender off. So it doesn't look to be too awfully hard. There's a couple bolts at the hinge that need to come out. We've got to take this lower trim piece off here. There are some Phillip head screws on the front and one on the back that have to come out. The headlight will need to come out, and then these bolts moving up the fender here in the engine bay need to come off. There's a handful of hidden bolts. The reason the headlight has to come out is there's two bolts that are behind it in order to get that off. And then there are some bolts underneath that are not too terribly difficult once we gain access to them. So I am going to start tearing into this. First thing I'm going to do though is back on the inside is I'm going to take this kick panel off. There is one nut on the back side that is part of a stud that is attached to the hinge that I need to take off. And then there are, then we'll just figure it out as we go along. So anyhow, let's get this thing started. All right, once you have this open, pull the one bolt off for your little electrical connector junction here. It's just a single T20. Takes off one small bolt. That a whole junction moves out of the way. Then you have access to your one 13mm nut that is attached to the stud, which is part of the door hinge itself that has to come out. So just remove this and then we are done inside. All right, if you hold your door kind of in an open position, maybe about halfway, you can see that there are two 8mm bolts that are facing you. The only way to get to those is to come in through the door hinge area. So we're just going to put a long extension on a ratchet and go ahead and pull those two off so we can shut the door completely. Next two pieces are going to be the one Phillips head screw here and the ones up at the front. Now that I've got those two screws out, I am aft of the front tire. This trim piece that the Phillips head screw was on the front side here has some more of these push-pull plastic tabs that just annoy the crap out of you, and then there's two more studs on the inside that just fit into the body of the car. So all you do is pry down or pull down on this and it will come apart. It's a pain. It's going to feel like I'm breaking it, especially with it being, you know, below freezing out here. So I'll just take my time, pull these two pins out, and then just work this free, because this is going to give us access to the other two bolts. Make sure the camera's still on. All right, like I was mentioning, as you pull this out, you've got 4 push pins, 2 of which you could see very clearly from the bottom of the car. And then it just fits in and kind of snaps in back into the bottom spoiler, for lack of a better word. So with that off, now we can pull this shield out of the way. And we've got 2 bolts here, 1 and 2. A couple things worth noting. When you pull these 2 bolts out on the bottom, there's a good chance that there are some body shims in here. And that's just in order to get the distance right so your body panels actually line up well, and then that you have straight lines. So if your shims come out, make sure you put them back in. Next up on the agenda is to pull the headlight. Headlights are pretty simple. There's just a couple of kind of these locking tabs that just pull out, and the headlight does slide forward. So once we get the headlight slid forward enough, since we need it completely out of the way, we are just going to disconnect our connections. Now, this is not a factory headlight. This is something fancy that my son wanted to put in at some point, so my connections are slightly different. It is worth noting that behind the marker lamps there are 2 studs. They've got a little expanded end. They fit into some holes in the backside. So after you pull your 2 fasteners up front, just pull it straight forward, and those studs will release from the fastener on the inside. Once the headlight is out of the way, there are 2 more 8mm bolts behind it, so we'll go ahead and remove those. Probably the hardest part of this job, only because I'm old and I'm fat, is just forward of the tire. And if you pull back your splash guard or your fender well lining, which is why we had to remove that one Phillips head screw facing the tire, there are 2 nuts right up here. So we just have to reach in and back those 2 off. Once we get those, or got those other 2 bolts loose forward of the tire, last but not least is to take the 3 bolts on the top and get those out. And then we're probably going to tape off the seam between the door and the fender, just to ensure as I'm taking it apart I don't scratch anything. That's just me being a little bit overly cautious. One thing to note with these screws up top, there's probably shims underneath 1 or 2 of them. When the shims come off, make sure you put them back in the same spot. Like I said, just a little bit of tape. I just kind of wrapped it around the seam. It's only electrical tape. It's not going to be on here long. I wouldn't leave this on there if it was going to be, you know, weeks and weeks and weeks, but it's only going to be an hour or so. So just something as these edges start to get a little closer. I don't want to put a scratch in there. I don't want to have a lasting reminder that I didn't do any prep work that I should have done. All right, from this point forward, the fender itself is loose. There is a small stud behind here that wants to be a pain. It's not really part of the fastening. I don't know if you can see that. I'll show it once I get it out, but it has a tendency to want to hang up on this, so I will have to manipulate that a little bit. But the fender moves forward and then out. Make sure you have something, you know, nice and soft that you can put the fender on so you don't scratch it while it's out. And the next thing we'll get to will be the door hinge. Well, the next thing is groceries. Then we'll get back to the door hinge. All right, did not film that after I came back from helping the wife with groceries. But basically, like I was telling you, this stud, just put a little pry bar in here. This is flexible, it is plastic. Pull that out of the hole that fits in. And when that happened, I had to pick it up. There's a lip here. Right, it just fits on the other side of the lip. Just kind of pick it up and gently move it away from the paint on this side, and it came right out. It was not difficult at all. I was being super cautious, trying not to scratch paint on either side. So that was pretty simple. Now, I've got 1% battery. So at this point, we are going to pull these two bolts, those two bolts, leave the door in the closed position. There is enough wiggle room once you get those bolts out in order to get that stud that we took the nut off of the inside, and then we should be able to swap the hinge pretty quickly and put it all back together. By the way, these bolts are 13 millimeters. So if you leave the door in the closed position, you don't really have to worry about alignment issues or problems from that perspective. The door's not going to fall, it's latched, therefore it'll stay where it's supposed to. So what I was telling you is, when you buy extensions, right, get some extensions with some knurling. It's amazing how many times you actually use just your fingers in order to continue turning, you know, nuts and bolts, whether putting them on when they're still loose or you know, backing them all the way off once you got the torque loose on it. That knurling makes all the difference in the world. All right, YouTube. New hinge is in. Little bit more problematic than it should have been, only because the door, which has been on these old hinges for quite some time, was sagging a little bit. So I took the time to loosen up these four, you know, at a time, open the door slightly, jack it up or let it down as appropriate, using a floor jack at the end of the door so I have good leverage, tightening these back up, checking the door striker. Where did it fall? Are we in alignment? Is everything good? You know, does the door close easy? Does the door close fully? So that took a little bit of time and effort, you know, but as a general rule, I'm pretty darn happy with this. I mean, the car does have 250,000 miles on it. It is not a picture perfect, you know, fit, but my door striker is, it's almost impossible to see there. Let me see if I can get a flashlight and get a better picture. The door striker is, how am I going to do this, Robert? Is pretty darn center with my latch. So I'm really happy with that. Close is fairly simple. Knife is good. It's going to take a little bit in order to get that door catch to move, you know, cleanly. I'm going to put a little bit of white lithium grease on there in order to make it work. Now it's just time to put it back together. Fender goes on just like it did before. Everything connects just the same. I will have to jockey around a little bit in order to, you know, make sure my gaps are even. Putting the shims back in the way they're supposed to obviously helps, but you know, I'm just going to take my time and make sure that I get everything back where it's supposed to be. As of right now, it took me about an hour and a half to get to this point. Now with that, I stopped and talked to the wife a couple times. I did go inside and you know, help her unload the groceries and even let the dogs out. So I would say that if you were able to just work on this, it would be, oops, I guess I could talk to the camera every once in a while. I guess it would be about an hour. I think that would be a pretty safe bet. Hour to get it apart, hour to get it put it back together. You know, obviously it all depends on if things want to cooperate and come apart like they should. So I'm going to put it back together. I don't think I'm going to film this, but I will show you once it's all complete, you know, how the door operates. All right, later. Finished product went together fairly well. Worked on a few of the body gaps, not exactly perfect top to bottom. I ended up having to shim the bottom out because it was nowhere near perfect. It's been that way ever since we got the car. Things look pretty good. Door alignment looks good. I'll probably play around with this shimming a little bit more at the bottom, just because that's how I am, a little bit of a perfectionist. So, but that's not going to be for today, because I am going to go spend some time with my wife today. So, that is how you change a door hinge on a 99 to 04 New Edge SN95 Mustang. Hope it helps somebody. Definitely not the most enjoyable job in the world, but it's getting there. By the way, I'm waiting on brake cables for Willwood, so they will be here later, well, probably tomorrow, since the weather's nasty. Anyhow, later.